Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
When you want to have fun and have scratchers to scratch, there's a playful way you can do just that. Scratch with the key or acrylic nail. Scratch with the quill from a porcupine tail. Use a belt buckle from your friend Lamar. Or scratch with your pick while you play guitar. You can scratch in a bunch of different playful ways. Scratchers from the California Lottery. A little play can make your day. Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. From the time I was a young kid, I wanted to be a writer. Back in elementary school, I remember writing short mysteries that started with, "It was a dark and stormy night." Cliché, I know. But even now, writing a spooky story is at the top of my bucket list, and it's something I'm actively working on. So I have a deep respect for people who not only think about writing, but actually do it. There are some incredibly talented writers all over the world, telling spooky and scary stories across a broad spectrum of subgenres. In today's episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to hear 3 scary stories from 3 Red Treehouse listeners. A huge thank you to each of them for allowing me the privilege of telling their stories. They're told in no particular order, but trust me, each of them are guaranteed to keep you up at night. Along the way, ask yourself these questions. What scary experiences do you have? What has given you the creepy feeling that you were being watched? What has made you do a double take to make sure there was nothing hiding in that dark corner of your room? And is it possible that whatever you experienced is something the rational mind can't simply explain away? I'll share the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Our first story comes from Reddit user Vladex. This story references Kuchisake Onna, the terrifying Slit-Mouthed Woman we explored in episode 80 of the Red Treehouse. Quote, "Many years ago, I was watching horror videos on YouTube. A particular video caught my attention. It was titled, 'Scary Japanese Urban Legends,' or something like that. Most of the urban legends were pretty forgettable, except for one. It was the curse of Kuchisake Onna. I'll explain why this one stuck with me. In short, the curse of Kuchisake Onna is about a malevolent spirit, demon, or ghost that appears as a woman with a mask on her face. She appears in front of travelers walking in the night and will ask them this question: Am I beautiful? If the person says no, Kuchisake Onna will mercilessly kill them with a pair of scissors. If, however, the person says yes, she will remove her mask, revealing a mutilated face cut from ear to ear. She will then say, How about now? Am I still beautiful? If the person says no, they'll be killed with scissors as stated before. If the person says yes, Kuchisake Onna will yell liar and proceed to kill the person with her scissors and leave them with the same ear-to-ear mutilation as hers. The only way to escape this painful, terrible death is to neither respond with yes or no, but instead by saying, You're okay, or You're so-so. This will completely confuse Kuchisake Onna, giving the potential victim a chance to escape. The reason this particular urban legend stuck with me was because, in short, it scared the shit out of me. Not only that, but it also made me want to remember what to say in case I ever ran into Kuchisake Onna in real life. But there's no way that could ever happen, right? Well, even if it does, I know I'll be ready. I have nothing to worry about. It was around 9:25 p.m., and I had just spent hours cleaning this house my family and I used to live in. I had to clean all the dust and broken drywall. I ran into a bunch of rats that decided to invade after we temporarily abandoned it. I was so done with it, and was waiting outside for my dad to pick me up. As usual, he took his sweet time, but eventually got there. I got inside the car and we rode off. My dad and I rarely speak when we're in a car together. I wish it didn't have to be this way. Sadly, we don't have that father-son bond or relationship that everybody else has. We approached this red light, the intersection that I will never see the same. At that point, I'd been struggling to keep my eyes open. I usually don't get sleepy around 10 p.m., but I was really tired. I sat there slouched, with my head facing up and my eyes half open. Then, 2 headlights behind us just turned on out of nowhere. I figured someone just forgot to turn them on and decided to do it now. I don't know what made me want to look at my dad, but I did it almost naturally. He was looking down, but then suddenly the window of his side flew open instantly. It was insane. The window went from all the way up to completely down in less than a second. My dad jumped and immediately looked to his left. I was confused and tried looking out the window. It was dark, and at first I didn't know what I was looking at. Then my eyes focused, and I saw a short woman with long black hair, wearing a hospital mask, standing in front of the driver's side door. Who was this? A homeless person? Keep in mind this was recent. and obviously people wear masks due to the current pandemic. This person looked completely normal at that moment. Can I help you? My dad said. As the light was still red, he felt he had to say something. For a moment, the woman did not say a word. She just looked in the general direction that was the inside of our SUV. Her eyes looked completely black, and I could not see any white in them. Then, to our surprise, she asks, "Am I beautiful?" I knew I heard this before. I knew this was something bad. But what was it? Where have I heard this before? As I was thinking hard and trying to remember, my dad answers, yes, you're pretty." Then I remembered. That damn urban legend about the Japanese girl. The one where she murders you if you say the wrong thing. I remember now. But these urban legends aren't real. This is just a coincidence. She just so happens to be wearing a mask because of the pandemic. Under that mask is a normal, beautiful face. The woman then slowly reached behind her ear and removed one of the strings of her mask. What I then saw was burned into my mind to this very day. What I saw was the most hideous, grotesque, sickening, nauseating, toothy, disfigured mouth I'd ever seen. And of course, each end reached both ears. In a voice that sounded like a mix of a young innocent girl who's been beaten and of a threatening monster, she said, "How about now? Am I still beautiful now?" I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. No matter how hard I tried, all I could do was look. And even then, I couldn't look away with my eyes. It was almost as if there was an unknown force freezing me in place, but keeping me conscious. Like sleep paralysis. My dad wasn't able to move either, except for his mouth. I could see it twitching and rapidly opening and closing. I was internally yelling, "She is so-so. She is okay. She's all right. She's not bad. Dad, please. Please, Dad. Say she's okay, please." My dad started. My dad is not the type to lie. He'll tell it how it is. At the same time, though, he's lied before. To me, to my mom, to get himself out of trouble. So whichever one he decides to do would lead us to a brutal death. "You are okay." Huh? The next few seconds felt like a blur, but I was snapped out of my frozen position when I felt my neck almost snap as my head hit the seat behind me. The car flew down the intersection, as my dad was now flooring it. The sounds of the tires and engine echoed down. I came back to Earth seconds later. For a whole 10 minutes, neither of us said a word. Too shocked to speak, heart still racing. I broke the silence. I said, "Dad, how did you..." "Know what to say?" "Yeah, how did you know?" This isn't the first time I've dealt with the supernatural. You have to educate yourself on different situations, because they exist, and they're real. "Dad, I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. I couldn't move or speak. I wish I could have helped even though you knew what to do. It's okay, we're alive. Why didn't you say you're okay faster? You made me think you were going to say either yes or no. What took you so long?" My dad said, the light was still red. The funny thing is, my dad avoided a ticket for running a red light, because it turned green at the exact moment he floored it." End quote. Our second story comes from author Michael Kelso. You can find several of his books on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. And you can find him on Threads and Instagram at Michael Kelso 8294. This is Michael's second submission to the Red Treehouse. You can listen to his first story, The Night Watch, in episode 73. The title of his story is My Neighbors Have Disappeared. Quote, "My neighbors have disappeared. I live in the suburbs on a block where everyone knows each other and they're all friendly. Every morning when I drive to work, I see kids waiting for the bus. In the afternoon when I come home, I wave at dads out washing the cars, teenagers mowing, you know, the usual stuff you'd see on a suburban street. Last week, I noticed a lack of activity from my neighbors 2 doors down. They have 3 kids, and someone is always outside doing something. Not seeing any of them in the yard felt wrong. I've lived here for 2 years, and I can't remember more than a handful of good weather days that someone from that family wasn't outside. I chalked it up to happenstance. Maybe they were busy or took a day trip. It could happen, I told the suspicious voice in my head. After the 3rd day of not seeing a soul, my voice was telling me something was wrong. I decided to go over and see if there was anything out of the ordinary. As I walked down the sidewalk, I saw the usual signs of life: toys in the yard, a bike leaning against a porch. Everything seemed normal. And then I noticed it. The lawnmower was sitting in the middle of the half-mowed yard. It was stopped right in the middle of a row, as if whoever was mowing had something more important come up. I stared at the mower as if it would give me the answer to what had happened. It didn't. I slowly approached the porch of the partially mowed house. I hesitated for a moment before gathering the courage to knock. My knuckles on the door seemed to be unnaturally loud. It was then I realized that there were no animal sounds either. I know for a fact that this family had a pet dog, and yet my approach, and even my knock, had not garnered a single bark. The hair on the back of my neck stood at attention as I knocked again. There was no answer. I leaned over and peeked in the window. The inside was messy, like a normal house with kids should be, but there was no sign of a struggle. More importantly, there were no people. I angled myself to see into the dining room. There were plates on the table with half-eaten food on them. My paranoia meter went red line. I wanted to know what was happening. I needed to know if everyone was okay. But I didn't want to cross the line between concern and breaking and entering. I'd let fate decide. If I tried the door and it was locked, I'd walk away. I reached for the doorknob like it was a snake about to bite me. I grasped it, closed my eyes, and turned. The door opened. I wasn't sure if that made me happy or terrified. I stepped inside, pushing the door open slowly. "Hello," I called. No one answered back. I crept to the kitchen and saw the half-eaten plates of food with flies buzzing around them, and the chairs pushed back like everyone had just excused themselves and left the table. "Where the hell did they go?" I whispered. I continued through the kitchen into the living room. The TV was off, and the room looked lived in but empty. Pillows were strewn about the couch and floor, but once again, no sign of a struggle. If anyone took them, it seemed like they did it without a fight. It made me wonder if one of the family members was being held hostage at gunpoint, and the others didn't struggle to keep them safe. I peered out the window to the backyard, but saw nothing out of place. I turned toward the stairs and made a quick decision. Upstairs or basement? Since the basement was the last place I wanted to go in my own house, I chose the upstairs. "I'm coming upstairs to check and see if everything's okay," I announced loudly. "Please don't shoot me or anything. I'm a neighbor. I noticed you guys haven't been out in a couple of days and wanted to make sure everything's good." Every word I said as I climbed the stairs seemed totally reasonable. It was also zero comfort to me when I was in someone else's house. I knew I was putting myself in danger. Even if it was innocent, I could easily be made to look like the aggressor. I reached the top step and turned towards the bedrooms. I started down the hallway listening for any sound. The only thing I heard were my own footsteps. They seemed unnaturally loud in the absence of normal household noise. I opened the first door I came to, unsure of the horrors I would find. The door opened to a princess's delight. The entire room was pink, and there was a huge castle in the corner filled with princess dolls. What I didn't see was any occupant. This continued for the next two rooms. One was obviously a teenage boy's room, and the other the master bedroom. Nothing strange reared its ugly head. The further I went, the more my anxiety grew. By the time I had made the rounds upstairs, the last door was the bathroom. Visions of finding the bathroom full of blood, a la Psycho, filled my head as I slowly opened the door. The room was immaculate. At this point, I wanted to find them and ask their secret to getting their shower tiles so clean. Having searched the upstairs, I faced the horrible prospect of going into the basement. I went back downstairs and paused at the top of the basement stairs. I had that horrible feeling of vertigo, like in the movies when they do that zoom out while moving forward thing. I flicked on the light, took a deep cleansing breath while I found my courage, then grabbed a handrail and descended. It was actually a very nicely finished basement with a big screen TV hanging on the wall, a sectional couch, and a bar in the corner. I was about to turn and head back upstairs when I saw it. There was a sneaker sitting straight up, peeking out from around the edge of the couch. I slowly approached, as my mind flashed images of a body lying on a carpet full of blood. I turned the corner and found something immensely more terrifying. The sneaker was on a teenage kid. I had seen him mowing the yard before. He was laying on his back, still as stone. There was no blood anywhere around him, but he wasn't moving, and his eyes were wide open. Laying on the floor with him were 4 other bodies. His family. They were each laying straight out, their heads touching. It was like they formed a human star. I leaned down and felt the teenager for a pulse, but there was none. I moved to the next body and felt for a pulse. The little girl, maybe 8 years old, also had no pulse, and eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Or should I say, through the ceiling. She also had no visible wound, and no blood near her. As I went around, Each of the 5 people laying in the star-shaped circle had no vital signs, but also no visible signs of injury, and eyes wide open. It was the creepiest thing. As if each of them could just get up and resume their day like nothing had happened. I decided it was time to call the professionals. I pulled out my phone and called 911. They said they would dispatch an EMT and police, and I should stay where I was. I resisted the strong urge to get the hell out of there. 9 minutes later, I wish I had. I was being interrogated by everyone with a uniform. I can't remember how many times I retold the same story. I guess they were trying to catch me in a lie. Once their curiosity was satisfied, it was time to satisfy mine. I asked the EMT what was the cause of death, and they seemed as stumped as I was. Eventually, they let me go, but the cops told me to be available for more questioning. Translation: we're not 100% sure you didn't do it, so don't run away in case we have to arrest you. I walked home and tried to get some rest, but those wide open dead eyes haunted me. I picked up a paper the next day on my way to work. I was surprised when there was no mention of the family I'd found. Maybe they didn't want to print anything until they were sure. That evening, when I drove home, I couldn't keep my eyes off the house as I drove by. There was no activity, just the same as yesterday. I didn't want to, but my arms seemed to act on their own. I pulled over and parked in front of the house next to the one from yesterday. There was a police car in front of the house and yellow tape all through the yard. I approached the car and the cop got out. "You're the guy from yesterday that reported the incident." "Yeah." "What are you doing back here?" "I haven't seen my other neighbors out today either. Did anyone check on them?" "I'm not sure." "Do you want to go check?" He looked at the house and hesitated. "I'm supposed to be watching this one." "Why?" "I can't really say." "They're still not sure what caused the deaths, are they?" "I can't say." "Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going over to the neighbor's house and make sure they're okay. You can follow along, or you can sit here. You forgot the other option." "What's that?" "I could arrest you for breaking and entering." I thought about it for a moment. "You could, but that would mean you'd have to leave your car." With that, I turned and headed to the neighbor's house. When I reached the porch, I looked back and saw the officer staring at me grim-faced and slowly shaking his head. I knocked on the door and got no response. I turned the knob, and the door opened. I was about to step inside when a hand grabbed my shoulder. I felt like I jumped 10 feet in the air. "Don't do that," I hissed at him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the cop said. "I'm checking on my neighbors." "You can't. It's breaking and entering." "No, it's only entering." "Stop." I rounded on him. "Did anyone check to see if they were okay?" "Well, no." "Has anyone seen them during all the comings and goings?" "I don't think so." "Okay then, I'm going to check on my neighbors." I turned back to the house and knocked on the door. After several more knocks, there had been no answer. I reached for the knob and turned it. The door was unlocked and opened. I stepped inside and looked around. "Hello," I called. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered back. I strained my ears listening for anything that might indicate someone was home. All I could hear was the ticking of a large grandfather clock that stood in the main hallway. "Maybe they went to the store," a voice said in my ear. I freaked out, nearly having a heart attack, and did a comical little dance, turning around and finding the cop standing there. "Stop doing that," I said, trying to get my heart out of my throat. "Doing what?" "Sneaking up on me." I wasn't sneaking. I took some deep breaths and got my heart rate back close to normal before proceeding. I headed toward the kitchen, having a good idea of what I'd find, but hoping I wouldn't. When I got there, sure enough, there was half-eaten food on the table. It looked like they had suddenly got up in the middle of a meal. "Just like the others," I said. "The neighbors?" "They left right in the middle of a meal too." "Why?" "No idea." I turned and saw the basement door looming large in front of me. I had the sinking suspicion that I wouldn't find anyone upstairs, so I went straight for the basement. The cop grabbed my arm. "Don't you want to check upstairs?" he said. "I have a feeling if anyone's in this house, they're down here," I said, reaching for the basement door. He released my arm and rested his hand on his gun as I opened the door. I descended the stairs, glancing at the jars of homemade jam on the shelves lining the stairwell. This basement wasn't finished. It was an uncovered concrete floor with more shelves full of canned fruits and vegetables. It didn't take much searching to find the older couple laying in the middle of the floor, face up, with their heads together and eyes wide open. "Oh my God," the cop said. I just sighed in resignation. I hated having these assumptions come true. He leaned down and checked their pulse, but I knew there wouldn't be one. He got on the radio and called into Discovery, all the while taking credit for it. I left the house after being interviewed and walked home. As I stepped onto my porch, I looked over at the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles, and it struck me. The first victims were 2 doors down. These second victims were next door. Am I next? A chill ran through me, even though it was 80 degrees out. I decided to take a vacation. I called my boss and told him I needed a little time away. He complained about the suddenness of the request, but approved me for a week off. I packed a suitcase with no specific destination in mind, just a few extra sets of clothes, and threw in a swimsuit at the last moment. I didn't really care where I went. I just knew I had to get out of the house. I called the post office and had my mail stopped, then grabbed my suitcase and headed downstairs. I realized I hadn't eaten anything since this morning, so I grabbed a bowl of cereal and stood at the counter eating it. As I chewed, a sudden feeling came over me. It was a feeling of peace, but at the same time, one of longing, as if I wasn't where I was supposed to be. My mind went blank as I dropped the cereal bowl and turned toward the basement door. I started walking toward it, knowing I had no choice. This was just what I needed to do. There was no question. I opened the door and started down the stairs, closing it behind me. As I descended, a feeling of belonging permeated me. I walked to the center of the room and lay down on the floor. I stared at the ceiling, unable to move. The feeling of peace waned and was replaced with dread. My eyes grew wide with the realization of what had happened to the neighbors. I tried with everything within me to struggle, to roll over, to do anything, but I couldn't. There was nothing I could do but lay there, My mind reeled. I could feel invisible hands holding me down. I felt a rushing like water was pouring through me, and heard a roar like an incredible wind. I knew my soul was being sucked out of my body. I heard a sinister chuckle as I futilely fought against the inevitable. The smell of sulfur assaulted my nose. I was falling, clinging at air, trying everything I could to save myself. There was nothing I could do. I was completely helpless. And then, I felt other hands grabbing me and pulling me up. The chuckle and the rushing ceased. I could feel the air around me charged with anger. There was a mighty struggle, and then a pop. I felt weightless, like I was a cork that had been shot out of a champagne bottle. I landed on the floor with a painful thud. I opened my eyes to see the cop who threatened to arrest me just a few hours ago, kneeling beside me, breathing hard. I looked up at him. "What the hell just happened?" I said. "I came over to ask you a few questions, and found you down here laying on the floor, convulsing. How did you—" "I panicked," he said. "I didn't know what else to do, so I started saying Hail Marys. I'm glad you did. I think we should get you out of here." "Am I still a suspect?" I said sarcastically. "You're welcome," he said, struggling to his feet. I followed suit, feeling like I was walking through quicksand, being dragged back to the floor. I fought off the feeling, ran out of that house, and never looked back. End quote. Our third story comes from writer Oliver Richards. You can find several of his short stories at his website, ojrichards.net, and you can find him on Threads and Instagram at OLSBurger. The title of his story is The Minute Murderer. Quote, "There was so much blood coming from under the door that Mr. Williams knew he had no choice but to smash it down. Leo Williams was the electrician of a respectable apartment building in Manhattan's Soho district. It was a job he was good at, and had trained as an apprentice in the district. He had a good relationship with the tenants, and this was the first time he could ever remember there being an accident. It had been a quiet day, and he had seen Mr. Drayton, who worked as a police inspector, arrive from work only an hour earlier, and there was no cause for concern. But now, as Mr. Williams was doing some routine electrical inspection throughout the building, he saw a small pool of blood leaking out from Mr. Drayton's front door. "Mr. Drayton," he screamed, "it's Leo Williams. Please open the door, sir." He knocked and screamed for Mr. Drayton, to no reply. He knew it was time to get the door open, so after trying the doorknob one last time, he stepped back and gave it a few hard kicks until the door swung open. The pool of blood that had built up around the bottom of the door was now openly spilling out into the hallway. Mr. Williams quickly stepped over it and into Mr. Drayton's apartment. He began to gag almost immediately. There was blood splatter on every wall and the ceiling. Mr. Drayton's body was on the floor in a pool of blood. There were deep stab wounds all over his body, especially in his head and face, and his eyes had been cut out of their sockets. Mr. Williams was on the verge of running to call for help when he noticed a small envelope placed on Mr. Drayton's chest. It was positioned at an angle as to not get blood on it. Mr. Williams wanted nothing more than to run downstairs to the lobby and call the police. But instead, almost out of instinct, he picked up the envelope and opened up the letter. It read, March 15th, 1941. To my next undeserving victim, to whom this certainly concerns. I am what the papers like to call the Minute Murderer. This title I reluctantly accepted, as I do not like being called a murderer. It is such a lazy word. I prefer to think that I merely meet my victims. And if you are the first one to read this letter, you have chosen for us to meet. Going forward, on a day of my choosing, I will give you 1 minute. Just one. Before our meeting begins, its violent conclusion will be projected before your eyes, and I allow you to observe your dead, agonized corpse for 1 minute and fully absorb the horror as I arrive. And shortly afterwards, you will be dead in the manner that I have just shown you. Why? Why would I do this, you will ask? I am a cruel man. More a monster, I like to think. I take no pleasure in justice and have no time for fairness. There is no discussion of your good character and no consideration of your fine qualities. I despise you for no reason and wish you only misfortune. In the coming future, I shall watch with great pleasure as you spend the rest of your nights, fearing the darkness from which I come, and contemplating the arrival of our meeting. It will drive you to madness and despair, and I will take residence in your thoughts as I slowly choose which minute to end your life. I give you no option in being my next victim, and I await our meeting with great anticipation. Yours hatefully, the Minute Murderer. Mr. Williams read the letter and immediately recognized what he was reading. The Minute Murderer was an urban legend in New York City, first recorded in the 1820s, with all the killings happening only in the 5 boroughs. There had been 11 murders in total, all violent, bloody affairs, and all with a letter attached addressed to the next victim. There had been many theories put forward, some saying that the killer is a ghost, or some kind of monster with telepathic abilities that shows its victims their death before killing them. However, some observers said that was impossible, and that each murder was a copycat, as the crimes had been committed years apart in a period of over 100 years. The biggest skeptics denied that the killings were even connected, and laughed off any mystical powers as a simple ghost story. Mr. Williams read the letter a few times before dropping it in the blood and running down to call the police. The murder was investigated, and Mr. Williams was even a suspect for a short time. But eventually, it was classed as unsolved, and the case was abandoned. Afterwards, Mr. Williams left his job and enlisted in the Army, and after 1941 was sent to fight in the Pacific. Upon his return from the war, he settled in Brooklyn and had a job selling electrical supplies. But he never forgot what happened in Soho, and indeed he struggled mentally from both the memories of the letter and those of the war. Mr. Williams was a good, loving man, but he was erratic and regularly distracted, and even his closest friends could not make sense of his crippling anxiety. Just as the letter said, he lay awake at night, seeing movements in the shadows, his heart pounding every time he walked into a room alone. His fears and nervousness led him to turn to drink for comfort, and his behavior often became overbearing for his wife and 2 children. But despite his problems, he worked hard and did his very best to provide, and his family stayed together, but only just. 21 years went by since the day of the letter. It was the day of his eldest son's wedding. Their little house in Brooklyn was beautifully decorated for the festivities. The wedding was beautiful, and the ceremony went off without incident. There was a reception at their house, and the wedding party gathered on the lawn on that beautiful summer's day. At the end of the day, Mr. Williams wanted to share a cigar with his two sons, and so he went inside the house and to his office to fetch them. When he walked in, the office was covered with blood everywhere. The walls, ceiling, and floors had long lines of blood splatter cast around. The years of built-up tension caused him to recoil in horror, and he saw himself lying on his desk. His arms and legs spread out, and his head was missing. His head had been crudely hacked off his shoulders and was lying on the floor. His eyes were wide open with terror, and his mouth was wide open, and one of the cigars had been placed loosely between his lips. Looking back to his body, there were cuts and slashes all over. There were so many cuts that it had almost torn the clothes off his body completely. His abdomen was turned inside out, and there was so much blood, it was almost impossible to see his desk. Everything was just a dark red. The only thing that was not covered in blood was the letter. The small cream envelope he opened himself once, intended for the next victim. The letter was positioned carefully to avoid staining it with blood. He remembered back to the letter, and he looked at the clock on his wall. 30 seconds had gone by. Tick, tock, tick, tock. He glared at the clock hands quickly moving its way around to the top of the clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 10 seconds and he knew it was over. In these last precious moments, the only thing he could do was say a prayer that no one from the wedding would discover his body, and open the letter. Then, before he knew it, the last second went by, and the office changed before his eyes. His mutilated body and all the blood was all gone. His office was back to being the clean, neat room, with 3 cigars waiting on his desk. But he saw now that he was not alone. He could see the figure standing in the doorway behind him via the reflection of his window. He slowly turned around and looked at the shadowed figure. He could not see its face. He wasn't even sure there was a face. There was just darkness and shadow, with nothing reminiscent of anything living. The shadowed figure wore a fedora hat and a long trench coat, from which its sleeve there protruded a long, shining dagger. Mr. Williams had a gun, a small snub-nosed revolver hanging up on his coat hanger behind him. He was tempted to reach for it, but he figured it wouldn't do much good. He knew his minute was up, and the meeting was about to begin. End quote. Another huge thank you to each contributor for sharing these truly scary stories. I've been asked, why do you love horror so much? There are lots of reasons, but I think largely because it forces us to experience and feel some things we would otherwise avoid. I truly think horror is a unique medium to convey the complexities of emotions we would rather stuff down or suppress. It keeps those thoughts and emotions at the surface, where we can process, sort through, and accept them. For me, these stories evoked a range of emotions: uncertainty, worry, concern, anxiety, and put me in a place where I could think through my own reactions and responses. And truly, that's a major part of the fun. Asking yourself the question, what would I do in a similar situation? I suspect the answer will be different for each one of us. If you have a scary story or experience you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. As we close this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. What scary experiences do you have? What has given you the creepy feeling that you were being watched? What has made you do a double take to make sure there was nothing hiding in that dark corner of your room? And is it possible that whatever you experienced is something the rational mind can simply explain away? I've shared the stories. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.